Obama, drew a line in the sand and said to our allies, you must not join China's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And one by one, our allies have turned their back on him. This is a form of population reduction. And Jerry Brown stated last week the nature of California can sustain only 300 to 500,000 people. Now you've got 39 million people in that state. What's going to happen to the other 38.5 million? This is a genocide waiting to happen. Americans are clueless on these broader issues.
Friends, I want to express my gratitude to you for pushing play, and I really want to take time to thank you all for all of your support over at sgtreport.com. It really, really, truly means the world to me. I know it means a lot to Rory and our other contributor, Peter, both of whom are great guys. Another great guy has been our longtime supporter and friend, historian and national spokesperson for LaRouchePAC, Harley Schlanger, and Harley's back on the line to give us an update about how the world is shifting. Harley, welcome back.
Good morning, Sean. How are you?
Well, I'm hanging in there, Harley. I expressed to you before we got started here that I'm befuddled by the fact that precious metals continue to be capped by the cartel. It really is a bitter pill for those of us who know what truth is and understand what the monetary truth is. And to that end, I really do want to talk to you about the U.S. and Europe and how they must join the BRICS. I know you guys have been pounding the table on that. You have a petition, and I would just like to read this for folks to get the conversation started with you, Harley. As leading European nations continue to add their name to the list of founding members of the Chinese-initiated Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the growing international campaign for the U.S. to follow suit and join the BRICS, as called for in the Schiller Institute petition, has become more timely and urgent than ever. We know how important the BRICS are, and we know how important the AIIB is becoming.
Well, let me start by saying that the problem most Americans have is that we live under a dome of deceit with the media, with the political debate. Most Americans have no idea about what's going on in the rest of the world, except where we're fighting wars. We learn about countries because we're invading them or we're attacking them, but we don't know what actually is occurring in many of these other countries. So, for example, when it comes to China, we keep hearing China's going into a very tough economic period. They're collapsing and on and on. Fact is, the Chinese GDP is growing at a 7.5% annual rate. That's down from 10%. But think about this. China's economy has grown dramatically. So a 7.5% rate of growth is still quite large. The Atlanta Fed is reporting that the U.S. GDP is at 0% growth in the first quarter. So we have this belief China's collapsing, Russia's collapsing, Russia's our enemy. And Americans have very little clue of what you just reported, that the President of the United States, who is the worst traitor we've ever had in that office, Obama, drew a line in the sand and said to our allies, you must not join China's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And one by one, our allies have turned their back on him, starting with the United Kingdom, and then Germany, France, and Italy, and then Austria, then Australia, South Korea. The only one that's held firm with us is Japan. And the Prime Minister of Japan, Abe, said, we're showing the United States what great allies we are. And the Japanese press roasted him, saying, yes, we're great allies, who's losing an opportunity to be involved in trillions of dollars of investments in Asia. So Obama and the U.S. media are treating this as a non-issue. But this is a huge issue because what the Chinese have done is set up an investment bank outside of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, outside of the EU and the Rothschild-dominated financial centers. And it's a bank that, without conditions, will be making loans for infrastructure development in poor countries. And companies all over the world, including in the United States, wish to be involved in this. Because of Obama, U.S. firms will not be involved. So if you get outside of the dome over America and actually see the world as it is, there's potential for dramatic changes. But unfortunately, under this president and under the treasonous idiots in Congress and cowards in Congress and the fools who are running for president, none of this enters into the U.S. political discussion.
You know, as you mentioned the fact, Harley, that most of the folks in the United States don't understand these issues and don't know what we're talking about and what we're reporting on. It resonates with me because I have to ask time and time again. I'm just absolutely perplexed by the fact that the mainstream media could actually hand us a Hillary versus Jeb 2016 ticket with a straight face, because Hillary in particular is an overt criminal. And that's not hyperbole, Harley. I mean, Benghazi, the private server has been cleaned and all the emails deleted. The litany of her crimes, really against the Constitution, are long. And I guess as it relates to the AIIB versus the IMF, I remember some video of Hillary high-fiving Christine Lagarde, and I just saw it the other night as Fox News was talking about, no, CNN, as CNN was talking about the real Hillary. This campaign in 2016 will be about the real Hillary, who she really is, and she's got a heart, she's got a sense of humor. That was the puff piece they did about Hillary as they prepare the narrative to give the American people another Clinton, Bush, ticket. And I read something interesting today, Harley. If you're under the age of 52, you've never voted in an election that did not have a Clinton or a Bush either running or in the administration in some capacity. It's a bizarro world in which we live, isn't it?
Well, this idea of inevitability, which you keep hearing, is how they control us. I mean, probably two-thirds of the electorate would vote for neither a Bush or a Clinton. So how is it inevitable? The only way it's inevitable is if those people don't vote, if they're driven out by the paucity of opportunity in the election. But, to go back to something you said about Hillary, to me, her disqualification is her embrace of Obama after being defeated by him and defeated by Wall Street. Hillary in 2008 had problems. What did she do? Classic Bedelheim syndrome. She embraced her tormentor and became a totally loyal operative for Obama, who is an operative for the global banksters. And so that's her disqualification right there. The crime she committed in Benghazi, that's the crime of the administration. And Obama should have been roasted for that as well and thrown out of office. Now, in terms of the Bushes, what more do you have to say? You look at the Bush pedigree. It goes back to Prescott Bush, the grandfather of Jeb, who was a funder of the Nazis. You look at George H.W. Bush, who was the person who first spoke in politics the words New World Order.
That's right.
When he was talking about how we're going to reshape things after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right. He said it over 200 times as president.
Yeah. Then you look at George W., who, you can't really say he was ignorant or stupid. He's neither ignorant nor stupid, but he may not have been fully clear on what he was getting us into with Iraq. Then you look at the fact that Jeb was actually before George W. Jeb was a founding member of PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, which was the neocon vehicle that was doing the drumbeat for war against Iraq and wars everywhere. So these two candidates represent everything that's terrible about the last 2 decades in the United States, and yet they're being portrayed as inevitable. Right. And then I'll just bring up another one, because I know that there are a number of people who have illusions about Ted Cruz. Here's a guy who, if you ask him, will go on and on about governments giving money to poor people, to unemployed, to people who don't deserve money. And, some of it, that criticism is legitimate. But has he said a word about bailouts of the biggest banks? Has he said a word about the Federal Reserve policy of 0% interest for those criminal enterprises called too big to fail banks? Not a word. And it's not surprising, because his wife was a managing director of Goldman Sachs until 3 weeks ago. So, Americans are clueless on these broader issues, unless they listen and go to your website, or, there are plenty of places where the truth is out there, but it's been so marginalized in most people's minds that they shrug and maybe complain, but they accept the idea that it's inevitable. And there's nothing inevitable. I like what Martin O'Malley said the other day, and O'Malley's someone people should look at because of his efforts to make the Democratic nomination about Wall Street. O'Malley was asked, how can you run against Hillary when it's considered inevitable that she's going to win? And he said, well, it is inevitable until it's no longer inevitable. And I think that's something that people really have to realize, that we can change things. And right now, I want to just say something to a lot of your loyal listeners. Your cynicism about the possibility for change is the greatest obstacle for change, because more people in this country want to get rid of these globalist bankers, want to get rid of the police state national security apparatus. They want to clean up the corruption, but they live under a cloud which tells them it'll never happen. And as a result, they do nothing except complain or become experts on how powerful the enemy is. The enemies of this country, largely centered in global financial and insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, are extremely weak. They're hanging on because they control the White House and the Congress and most of the governments of Europe. But they're weak, they're vulnerable. And if we use the instruments that we have in the Constitution, we can crush them. But that means people have to give up their learned cynicism.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You guys are doing so many grassroots things. That's why I find your organization so inspiring, Harley, and I was so glad that we were able to meet each other a couple of years ago, because you are one of the most articulate historians and economic observers and pundits that we know. And getting back to the Jeb and Hillary thing, it's just the absolute definition of insanity, Harley. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Getting Jeb or Hillary is literally insanity, because we will get nothing different and there will be no change. But the narrative in the Mockingbird mainstream media is that it is inevitable. But to Martin O'Malley's point, it's not. It's not inevitable, and we all need to get out there and fight for truth. I guess the question, Harley, is who do you fight for? You know, what candidate is out there that we can even get behind?
Well, the reason I bring up O'Malley is that he is making Glass-Steagall and the fight against Wall Street his leading issue. And, if he's sincere about this, and he seems to be, this puts him at odds with Hillary and Obama, as well as all the Republicans. And what, in discussions I had this last week with Lyndon LaRouche, what he said is that our organization, as small as it is, because of our authority and our record, we have a certain standing. We have to do everything we can to pre-orchestrate the campaign. And what he means by that is not let it be hijacked by the media or politicians who will choose to ignore real issues and instead focus on things that are problems and that are injustices, whether it's illegal immigration or the fight around abortion or gun rights or things of that sort. But they're not fundamental. The fundamental issue right now is who's going to control the credit policy of the United States. If it stays in the hands of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is nothing but an instrument for the leading Wall Street banks and foreign banks as well, if our credit system stays in their hands, our nation is finished. And our people are going to be starved and hit with drought. And if they rise up, there'll be a national security state out there to crush them. But if we can make this issue of Wall Street and the control of both parties and make that stick, then perhaps someone like O'Malley, who seems to be a fairly clever person, can realize that this is a horse he can ride in on. If we get focused, we can win. Now, is O'Malley the right vehicle? I don't know. But what we're going to do is make the point that if you're not supporting Glass-Steagall, you're a flunky of Wall Street. And we cannot afford another president or another Congress controlled by these banksters.
Well, that's absolutely for sure. I want to talk to you about the California drought here before we lose you, Harley. Agenda 21 seems to be coming into view to the degree that it's easy now to see how the powers that be could bring the people of America to their knees through drought, a food and water shortage, and then eventually the collapse of the dollar. I just want to read this, Harley, from LPAC policy member and former candidate for U.S. Congress in California, Michael Steger. He writes on LaRouchePAC.com, "The Dust Bowls of the 30s will be no comparison. Farmers in the Central Valley are targeted as criminals, threatened with terrorism against their farms. The forgotten urban and suburban populations, as well as the poor farm communities throughout the state, face food shortages and skyrocketing food prices. There is now public showers to save water, itself eerily reminiscent of fascism. And what will happen when those showers no longer have water? What will happen when those poor towns can no longer afford the water rates? When Wall Street firms, represented by the Bush family or T. Boone Pickens or Jerry Brown, make water a private commodity, who will die first?" Serious words, but the times are very dire in California. As Jerry Brown says, there's only a year of water left.
Well, and the idea that you're going to somehow solve the problem by rationing water, it's a complete fraud. But look, Jerry Brown, he's been a fascist since the 70s when he was known as Governor Moonbeam. He was a radical environmentalist then. And much of the problem in California is that this drought was foreseeable given historic records of what California's climate has been in the past. There could have been a continuation of the water projects of the 50s and 60s, which built the state, the Central Valley, the Imperial Valley, and so on, which allowed the state to be a garden for the country. But Brown opposed all that. So it's not man-made climate change that caused this. It's the stupidity of the environmentalists who shut down progress in science. Now they're using the effects of that in the drought to create this. On the one hand, you have Brown, who's having government mandates with an executive order for a 25% reduction of water usage. The conservative response is, well, we have to save water, but it's better to let the free market do it by privatizing water, letting the prices go up, and let that become the thing that enforces conservation. Well, as my colleague Michael Steger points out, once those prices go up, what happens with people who don't have money? What happens with the food supply when farmers are put out of business? So this is a form of population reduction. And Jerry Brown stated last week that the nature of California can sustain only 300 to 500,000 people. Now you've got 39 million people in that state. What's going to happen to the other 38.5 million? This is a genocide waiting to happen that would make what Hitler did look small in comparison.
Yeah, and it reminds me of what the Georgia Guidestones say. It reminds me of what the Agenda 21 plan is. And just for the record, Harley, I don't know if you guys follow this stuff over at LaRouche, but I've spoken with Dane Wigington, who runs geoengineeringwatch.com, and the geoengineering issue is a very real one. It's a very dire situation, and I think based on the Georgia Guidestones and based on now what we see playing out in policy, in public policy, it isn't a big leap to say that this is all being done by design. And at the end of the day, that's the scariest damn thing I can imagine, because, we've talked about the depopulation agenda before on SGT Report. We talk about it frequently, in fact. And to me, Harley, now I can see it coming into view in a very, very real way, and California is ground zero for it.
Well, Sean, if you go further in the release from Michael Steger you were reading, which is up on the LaRouchePAC website, he points out that he was in the office of the project director in the Senate of California for Water and Natural Resources. And Michael brought up that there had been droughts throughout history in California before there were any humans there. And the idea that cutting CO2 emissions is going to cause it to rain is fraudulent. And this guy went into a complete freak out and told Michael, "Get out of here or I'll call the police." And Michael said, "Well, can't we discuss this? Are you arguing that there were never droughts in California before there were factories here?" And the guy said, "You're harassing me," and got his secretary to call the police to throw us out. This is where you see the Gestapo. You see it on climate change, where they now are equating anyone who opposes the theory of man-made climate change is equated with a Holocaust denier. This is how a Gestapo works to control the debate. And that's what, to me, is why people who know better have to speak out while we still can.
Yeah, and the other thing that's terrifying about this whole situation, Harley, is that this is how fascism works, and there's no better example of it than Nestle, the multinational provider of bottled water. They're pulling water out of California, and they're not being affected by this 25% public water cut. That's only for the public. That's only for the people. Nestle will get to continue to pull out water in the frackers. Fracking, they get to use all the water they want. This is only for the public, and that's how you know that there's something far more sinister going on here than meets the eye.
Well, and Sean, as many of your listeners know, the key to fascism is not the jackboots and the swastikas, although that's an element of it. The key to fascism is corporate control. It was called corporatism originally. And it's when the bankers and the leading corporations get together to impose their policies on government. And Barack Obama is a fascist. There's no exaggeration in saying that. When we put out signs of Obama with a Hitler mustache and people reacted, including some conservatives saying, well, you really can't say that. It's proof. It's proven by his activity. The Obamacare policy does include within it the Nazi T4 extermination policy, that if you're not in the right category, you can be cut off for health care. If you're sick, if you're old, if you're poor, you'll get cut off. Now we're seeing in Baltimore, Maryland, 75,000 people are going to lose water because the price of water has gone up 40%. There's a privatization policy underway, and 75,000 people are going to have their water cut. So we're seeing this occur right in front of us. And people need to open their eyes and realize that on the one hand, this global elite is it's the same networks their grandparents supported Hitler and supported Mussolini.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening again today.
Mm-hmm.
Look, it's no coincidence that Obama's policy against Russia is to arm Ukrainian self-identified Nazis. Dmitry Yarosh, who came to the United States, who is the head of the right sector, whose militia wear SS symbols on their uniforms. Yarosh was greeted as a hero by McCain and Lindsey Graham and some people in the State Department. Yarosh was just named a chief advisor to Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, and to the military command. Now, this is a guy that we're not only talking about arming, but U.S. soldiers are being sent to Ukraine to train his militia forces to use weapons. Now, that's why the Russians are a little bit upset about this. So we're supporting fascists in Ukraine. We're supporting jihadists through the Saudis in the Middle East. By we, I mean Obama and the administration. And now we're seeing elements of the fascist economic program in this water situation coming into being. So it's time to wake up. It's really past due. But to end this on a positive note, the opportunity to break with this policy is there in two ways. One, organizing people against the initiators of this, the global elite, the financial networks of the too big to fail banks and Goldman Sachs and others, because they're weak. And if they're forced into a real audit, it will become clear that they're bankrupt and they're only being supported by the Federal Reserve. But then secondly, the rest of the world is moving on with the BRICS, with the AIIB. Look at the reception Obama got in Panama this last weekend, where he expected to be hailed as a hero because of the change in policy towards Cuba. And instead, he was raked over the coals because now the U.S. is going for regime change in Venezuela. The same policy, they just shifted from Cuba to Venezuela. So the rest of the world is ready to move. And we in the United States can play a huge role in breaking the power of this global bankers' dictatorship and moving toward peace and cooperation based on the United States as a sovereign nation state. And that's what LaRouchePAC is fighting for, and that's what we're hoping to bring forward in this upcoming presidential campaign.
Well, absolutely. If there's anything that the globalist powers that be have done most effectively, at least in this country, Harley, I think it's the fact that they've made so many of us feel neutered and helpless. And you guys are the polar opposite of that. You take action and you follow it up with more action. And I certainly do appreciate that about you and about the folks at LaRouchePAC. Harley, can you tell those listening how they might be able to get involved and take action?
Well, because the situation is so serious, I'm going to make an offer I did about a year and a half ago with you, which is if someone wants to communicate with me, you can send me an email, and your listeners know I will respond. You can send it to Harley SCH. That's HARLEYSCH @gmail.com. And you can also then go to LaRouchePAC.com, where you can have access to the videos and the reports that Sean mentioned earlier. And, I'm doing this because I still think we can win. And I notice some of the people who comment on the reports you put out, they say, well, Harley's naive, he's too optimistic, hasn't he learned? Well, I don't feel that I have to defend being optimistic. I think that's the birthright of Americans, the idea that we can change the world. And your listeners who find that offensive or somehow silly or naive, I would say to them, grow some gonads, get into the fight. So if people want to communicate with me, they can send something to harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to be in contact with them.
Well, that's a generous offer. I really appreciate that, Harley. And I hope those of you who are considering reaching out are doing it from the goodness of your heart and would do so respectfully. The rest of you who aren't interested in doing that, please don't bother Harley. He's too good a guy and he's too busy. And as far as getting involved, Harley, there's one truth I know, and that's when you don't use your muscles, they atrophy. So we all need to use our physical muscles and our intellectual muscles, and we need to stay in the fight because the alternative is death, really.
And just keep in mind, I don't think if your listeners go out and talk to people, you're not going to find anybody who's enthusiastic about a Hillary-Jeb election.
Right.
So why would they accept it?
No, 100%. No, it's absolutely a media-driven, Bilderberger-driven event. I think the Bilderberg Group has long been credited with picking candidates. It's definitely a media-driven narrative and one that's disgusting. And when I say Harley, a media-driven narrative, they're doing it on Fox News just the same as they're doing it on CNN. It's not just the left. It's a left-right media paradigm in bed together to drive this globalist agenda forward. And that's the most astounding part. Our guest has been Harley Schlanger, the national spokesperson for LaRouchePAC, LaRouchePAC.com. Harley, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Sean, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Yeah, let's stay in close touch, Harley. Look forward to having you back on again. And guys, thank you so much for your support at SGT Report. Be sure to visit LaRouchePAC.com. They've got great information, actionable information. And thanks for tuning in to this conversation. Check us out at thelibertymill.com. And I hope you have a terrific week. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.